everybody, and welcome back to another video here on my channel. In today's video, we are going over all the books that I did or maybe did not tackle on my monthly TBR, and of course every single book I did actually read in the month of February. It's my February wrap-up. Spoiler alert, we had a really great reading month in my opinion. I read a really great selection of books, and also I really loved a lot of my books. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into each and every one. I'm gonna go ahead and say this right now about my monthly TBR. So I did my monthly TBR for February, and I only picked 4 books. And I'm not going to show you which ones I did pick, but let's just say every single one of those 4 books I actually tackled this month. So I'll give myself a little pat on the back for that. I accomplished my actual monthly TBR. So proud of that, so happy. It was very small, I'm not going to lie, but that's beside the point. Let's first start off with book number 1 that we finished in February. I started this book on the 1st of February and finished it on the 5th of February. This was one of the books on my TBR. It was actually The Silent Woods. This is a thriller around 270 pages, give or take. I rated this book actually 4 stars. I felt like it was so intriguing, so interesting to read about it. You have this father and then this daughter who live in the Appalachian Mountains in the woods in the middle of nowhere. The father actually ran away for something he did in his past, and he's basically just been hiding out for the last, I think it's like 8 years or 10 years or so. And his daughter was a baby when he first fled and went to go live in the woods. And he's using technically his best friend's cabin. That best friend once a year brings them supplies right before the winter, and then one year he just randomly doesn't show up. So then they kind of scramble to go find some food, go to maybe a store for the first time in like 8 years. And then also they have a few people who are like trespassing in a way. They come wandering onto the property. The sheriffs kind of get involved with one thing that happens. There's a missing person. There's this crazy neighbor in a way who maybe isn't so crazy at the end, or maybe he is even more crazy than we thought. And there's so many things about this book that I found really intriguing. I love the characters. I actually really enjoyed the plot, the story, the backstory even. I thought it was really interesting, and I like how it ended. And I also love how there's like the tiniest bit of like romance in it. It's a random book that I felt like I would never feel characters wanting to get together, or maybe even rooting for them to kind of get together, and then there was a little touch of that. I always wanted to read and tackle ever since seeing it on Ian and Ashlyn's channel, and then I finally found it for my birthday, picked it up, and I got around to reading it, and like I said, it was 4 stars. I absolutely loved it. This one will be staying on my shelf for a while. Then I started this next book on the 9th and ended it on the 10th. I actually listened to this as an audiobook, more so at work on Sundays because we're not doing the plane. Our freight doesn't move on Sundays. We're just preparing it for the week next week in advance. I got to actually listen to this book, and I was actually so intrigued and so happy that I finished this, because this is one that might have been hard to get into if I would have sat down and read it, but listening to it, I just found it so interesting, especially while working. I was very much focused on the book and my work at the same time. It was great for my brain. This is technically Agatha Christie's collections. I have 5 books in here, but I'm going to talk specifically about N or M. It's a mystery story, just like most of Agatha Christie's books. It's around like 130 pages. It wasn't very long at all. And on top of that, I did only rate it 3 stars because I don't think in the long run I'm going to really remember too much of this book. Actually, looking back, I've kind of forgot a few things. I know exactly what M or M is, like the person, what it stands for, also the mystery that went along with it, and I feel like I can't really hardly talk about this book because I don't want to give too much away. But as always, any Agatha Christie book, I'm going to pretty much love it. I'm going to enjoy it, or I'm going to have a really great time. 3 stars all the way up to 5 stars is the only ratings I've ever given for one of her books, and I have so many of them, and I've read just a couple, so I'm very happy that I tackled this. This is just kind of like a filler type in book. It wasn't on my monthly TBR, but it was just like a good little tiny quick accomplishment. Next, I started on the 7th and ended on the 12th, a book from my TBR that I was so excited for. I was hoping that this was going to be as good as the first book. We have Rosemary Cottage. This is more of a mystery Christian subplot of romance book, and it's not that I didn't enjoy it. I really enjoyed it, like reading it. I just didn't find it as lovable or enjoyable as the first book. I couldn't get into it as much. I couldn't get with the characters. I liked Curtis a little bit more than Amy, but I felt like they bickered way too much. They argued about their siblings just a little bit too much, and it was a little bit infuriating, I'm not gonna lie. I struggled with that aspect, especially because it's like they were trying to solve the deaths, the murders of their siblings, which is not necessarily a spoiler, it's on the back of the book. And instead they're sitting there saying, well, my sibling didn't do this, so they're better, or your sibling did this and I didn't like them. And it was just every other chapter. I felt like it was a long portion of the book. It is around 306 pages, and I did rate it about 3 stars. I think technically it would have been a little bit better if it was a little less bickering. At the end, I started to come around, probably about the last 100 pages, maybe 50 pages. I started to come around, but there was a big portion where I was like, I don't think you guys are gonna get together. I don't think this one is gonna have a subplot of romance. And it kind of did. It was just very last minute, which normally is okay, but since they were bickering the whole time, I was like, I don't know. I did guess a few things, especially because it was relating around vehicles, and I retained the information information about a certain vehicle very quickly, so I pretty much spoiled it for me about who was the murderer or who was involved, let's just say. And then of course I guessed one other thing that is like a surprise at the end about somebody who maybe shouldn't have been around. I think it had a great potential. I just think it was more me reading it and getting annoyed and frustrated a little bit more than most people. I still think it's a good book and I'm glad to still have it and keep it on my shelf. It still had a few quotes, not as many as Tidewater Inn, that I wanted to annotate or just highlight. There's only one that wasn't Christian that I highlighted, and it's "A beautiful woman is always worth waiting for." Everything else was pretty much Christian, similar to "But don't shut the door to something that God might have for you." Things like that. Nothing too crazy, just little quotes that I thought would be extremely helpful, especially for like the Christian aspect. I still absolutely love Colleen Cobble's writing, and I'm a little bit excited, not as excited as I was to jump into this book, but I'm a little bit excited to jump into the third and final book of this trilogy. Then I started on the 12th and ended on the 16th, a Nicholas Sparks book. This was actually A Message in a Bottle. This is a book that I judged so many times for some reason by the cover. It's not that it doesn't have a beautiful cover, it's just for some reason I would see it on my shelf and I just always passed it. I never wanted to read about it. I never wanted to get into it. It was only like 280 pages, give or take, maybe 250, but I ended up actually really enjoying it, really loving it. It was a 4-star read, I'm not gonna lie. I did listen to a little bit of this and it was in a reading vlog on my channel. I think it was a perfect book for Valentine's Day. It was also on my TBR for the month, which made it the third book that we completed out of my 4 books. It's one of those that it's like a simple, fast, pretty clean romance that's also like a palate cleanser. There is one thing that I feel like most people won't enjoy, and that's because it's kind of an instant love. I actually really enjoyed it for some reason in this book. I just really got into it, I think because of how short it was. And I like the overall premise of, in a way, this girl finding a bottle and it had a message in it. She read it, she found it so beautiful, and then this is the part where I'm kind of unsure about. She wanted, because she was divorced, to have somebody to love her like this guy loved his wife that ended up passing away, and that's why he was writing letters and stuffing them into bottles and sending them out to the sea. And she basically tracked him down. That's the part I don't necessarily agree with, but at the same time, for whatever reason, I just fell in love with the story. I thought it was really like a cute story in a way, and also, like I said, it just was a great in-between book. It didn't make me think too much, and it was a fast-paced little book that I actually enjoyed. Of course, Nicholas Sparks being Nicholas Sparks, it's a little bit of a tearjerker at the end, maybe, if you're really prone to emotion. I mean, it got me just a smidge, but it was more of like the, oh, I seen it coming, and it still was like, dang, that's sad. But it's a classic Nicholas Sparks book, and I feel like for the most part, his books don't do me wrong. 4 stars on this. Then on the 16th, I started and also finished this. Again, this was at work on a Sunday, so I actually hopped back into the Giver Quartet and we read the second book, Gathering Blue. This I listened to, of course, at work. I actually enjoyed this story, but it did kind of throw me off just a little bit because I was so excited from reading The Giver to hop into this thinking it was going to continue the story. And we pretty much switched POVs. We're following some other little girl and her like growing up a little bit and some other things that were going on. It was like her survival in this community, but at the same time, it just wasn't the characters I was hoping to follow. So it took me just a couple, probably about 30 minutes to really get into this book. But once I was in it, I actually really enjoyed it as much as The Giver for the most part. It's a sci-fi around 179 pages, and I rated it 3.5 stars instead of 4 stars like I did The Giver, just because I was a little bit upset that we weren't following the same. But I have a theory. I have a theory because of the next book is called Messenger, and we talked about a messenger in Gathering Blue. So I feel like these 2 books go along with the woman or the girl that we were following, and then The Giver and Sun, because they correlate together from The Giver. I think those 2 are the timelines that I wanted to follow, or at least the character I wanted to follow, and then maybe they all connect somehow. I don't know how, but maybe they connect some way. That's my theory. I have not, of course, read the next one, but that's what I'm hoping it does, and I hope it like makes up for it at the last book. I hope it's just like the best one. It's like 4.5 stars, 4 stars at the bare minimum. I was glad to tackle this, get back into this. It wasn't on my TBR, but at the same time, it was just like a quick little story. And then on the 23rd, we both started and also finished this book as well. This was Understood Betsy. This is, I do believe, the oldest book on my shelves. This is a 1917 copy, and I didn't know this was kind of like Anna Green Gables type writing. It's more of like a little kid, kind of like Little Women, where you might read it and it's like a classic in a way. I ended up finding an audiobook and I listened to this at work on a different Sunday. I feel like I'm just listening to a lot of things at work on Sunday, but that's okay. I did listen to this and I really enjoyed this. I'm not gonna lie. It was like a little cute fiction story at 270 give or take pages. I rated it 4 stars. One of my favorite things that happened in this book was where the girls, they kind of grouped together and they wanted to turn around and help a little boy get adopted and clean up. And instead they kind of got humbled and taught a little lesson. in a little bit, but also they ended up helping him, but they weren't trying to get like him to give them thanks. It's just like a cute little story that I really enjoyed. The overall book is this little girl is actually living with her aunt, I do believe, and then she gets some kind of sickness. It's not tuberculosis, I can't remember what she has, but basically it's like, oh, you have to go live with somebody else, we have to decontaminate, we have to burn a bunch of stuff, blah blah blah. She goes and lives with somebody that she's not necessarily related to, and they eventually give her to somebody she's related to, but the aunt that she stayed with didn't actually like. So then she has this opinion on them, and she also was brought up very much like silver spoon in her mouth. So she was like realizing that not all places are like this, and just because they aren't maybe as rich, as wealthy, or have it as easy, they can be more humble, and they can be even just as nice, if not better, and they come around, they build up character. This little girl ends up building up her own character. She learns a lot of things, she's taught a lot of things, and then of course she works together. And I just found this story actually really interesting and like cute, and also just like not much thought into it. It was just like something that I wanted to tackle on my physical TBR that I've had on my shelves for a very long time, and I just never got around to fully finishing it, because I did start and read it probably about like halfway through when I was like 10 or so. It's been a long while, so it was nice to jump in and finally actually finish the book. And now we have my fourth and final book that we tackled for my monthly TBR, and also the last book I read in February. I just finished it last night. Today's the last day of February. This reading vlog is going to be so much fun to edit. I'm so excited I tackled this, and I cannot wait to continue the story. I hopped into Fourth Wing. I rated this book actually 5 stars, believe it or not. I felt like this book was so good. Just from right off the bat, I jumped into it. I absolutely loved how we jumped into action. I kind of compared it to the feeling that I felt when I first read Divergent in middle school. I had that same feeling while reading this book. I felt like it was so good, and I was so intrigued, and I had to go pick up Iron Flame even though I was like 100 pages into it. And I loved the characters. There were some things that were frustrating, some sad parts, some things that I predicted, especially the ending, some other things that totally blindsided me. This is hyped up for a reason, and I think it kind of should be, or at least have some hype with it. I think that this was a really great story. This is amazing timing that I read it since Onyx Storm came out, and I just had such a great time. I really love a certain character and another certain character, let's just say. I thought at first I was gonna like maybe like a friends to lovers, because I know this had like a subplot of romance, and then as we were reading I was like, I don't know, I kind of think like the enemy to lover would be better. Like I'm just getting more of that, because this friend is starting to annoy me. He's doing things like not believing her and doing other things that I'm like, and don't get me wrong, I like to follow rules to a point. Like I'm more of a rule follower than a breaker, but at the same time there's times when you should break some rules, and that was when I was getting really annoyed, but like not in a bad way. And also I could see when some people said they were annoyed about how small and fragile our main character is. Yeah, I mean it was said a lot, like the entire length of the book, but at the same time it wasn't overdone as much as I thought some people said it was. Like some people said it's every single page pretty much. It's not too bad, and it did kind of get descriptive towards the end. It was more of just like a military style book, fantasy, all this stuff going on, like trials and games, and leading up to this big graduation. And then I'd say maybe 150, 200 pages is when we started to get the romance, which I was like, that's fine. I like a little subplot, but I love more of the non-descriptive stuff and more of like the fantasy element. I'm a very big fantasy person, not so much on the romance. I'm kind of also iffy on how descriptive, because I don't really like descriptive stuff. I like clean stuff. So I had a really fun time reading this. I really enjoyed it. I think it's kind of worth the hype. I'm not gonna lie. If you haven't read this, you should probably read it. And I'm also so excited to edit my reading vlog and also post this video probably a couple weeks from now, to be honest, because I already have a few videos getting ready to be posted next week. So stay tuned for that if you're curious. My favorite thing about doing monthly wrap-ups is the statistics at the end. First, we have my favorite book of the month. I feel like I don't need to explain. 5 stars, it was my only 5-star read. This is my favorite book of the month. Because I bought Iron Flame, we have now went from 101 to 102 on my like books to reads list. At the same time, I have 12 of those books crossed off. That's a plus. On my 25 books I want to read in 2025, of the 25 books on that list, I have read 7 of them, which I'm ahead by a few books. I'm not 100% sure on how many, but I'm very excited to have that much of a jump start on the list. For my reading bingo, we do not have a bingo just yet, but I want to go through the ones that I crossed off, since now I'm labeling which ones I crossed off in which month. I want to list off the ones that I did end up crossing off for this month. Turned into a movie or a show, a book under 500 pages, a book with chapter titles, a 5-star read. I had to put my first 5-star of the year for that one, of course. I had one that didn't fit any of these prompts, so I used it as my free space, which was just a book on my physical TBR, a thrifted book, and finally a thriller book. For this month, I read 1 thriller, 2 mysteries, 1 romance, 1 sci-fi, 1 fiction, and finally 1 fantasy book. Also in total for this month, I read 7 books at 1,910 pages, and of course we had 1 5-star read. And here is all the books that I tackled in February. I'm so happy that I'm holding all these books up. I'm so happy I tackled so many good ones. I did feel like I cheated a little bit and used a couple audiobooks at work, but you know what? That's okay. I still read more than half of these books by myself, and I'm just very happy that this month was a really good month, and I'm ahead on all of my goals, on my reading goal, on my 25 books I want to read in 2025, on my page count goal even. Everything I'm ahead of by at least a couple books, if not a couple hundred to 1,000 pages, which is so amazing. It's such a great feeling to be so far ahead at the beginning of the year, just in case if I have a rough month. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for any future reading vlogs. If you want to be a part of my YouTube community, you already know what to do. Go ahead and subscribe and check out my book playlist down in the description or any other playlist I have here on my channel. As always, I hope to see you in another video here on my channel, and God bless.